okay, I am doing automation, I am doing AI agents. How do I make sure that the agent doesn't veer off a trajectory? And how do I ensure that there are guardrails in place?
The promise of AI is real. So is the challenge of making it work in your organization. Welcome to The Path Forward, where we explore the future of work in the age of AI. I'm pleased to be joined by Gautam Char and Raghu Malpani. Good afternoon.
Good afternoon to you.
Nice to be here.
All right, we're here to talk about orchestration. So Raghu, talk about where we are in this moment right now with AI. Where does orchestration fit into it?
Yeah, it's a question that I think about all the time, as you know. So to us at UiPath, orchestration is the difference between, say, a company owning a fleet of trucks versus owning a logistics company. The trucks do the work, but the logistics company decides what the trucks do, where they go, how they handle, a flat tire or a driver falling sick or a flood happening in a route and so on. So orchestration is the logistics company, and the workhorses are the tasks. So in this world, we find out that as you have AI agents built on any platform, could be UiPath, could be any platform of a customer's choice, or deterministic tokenless software, could be built in any software company. It could be built on UiPath or anywhere else. It becomes important to have a global view for a process that constitutes of these deterministic pieces of software with these agents. So you can compress cycle times, have that global end-to-end view, and have auditability and traceability. So that's really the role that we find orchestration play here and now.
Gautam, same question, but from your perspective at Omega Healthcare, talk to me about where you see orchestration in your business.
Maybe I should rewind a little bit into a history of the company and our focus. As we've been growing the company, the first step of the company was really, how do I reduce my cost structure by automating, say, point A to point B? And so we went down this path initially of, let's put RPA in there, and we became a UiPath customer in those days, and we probably used it to the hilt. Over time, what we found was RPA only took us so long, then we added the AI agent capability on top of that to take us again from point A to point B in a smarter manner. Now, fast forward a little more, the company has grown even more, and our clients are now expect us to be really an orchestrator between our agents, our bots, our third-party solutions, their third-party solutions, and their own AI solutions. So now, core part of our business is actually orchestrating between various technologies and the humans that we have in the company to deliver breakthrough results that clients expect from us. So we've been on this path for AI journey for at least 3 years now, 2.5, 3 years seriously. But the fact that we orchestrate very seriously is kicked in maybe about a year ago. And we've been really deep down in that part of the process.
That's great. So I want to talk about the idea of process, specifically breaking down a process and understanding what are the different pieces that go into that when you're thinking about applying orchestration.
Yeah, I think it's helpful to look at in the automation landscape. It's helpful to look at maybe what the tasks are, and then how a orchestration layer glues together the tasks. So in our world, UiPath, we found our product market fit, as you know, a decade ago or so with RPA. RPA is deterministic software. It allows you that enterprise reach through the mixed estate of applications that enterprise deploy, legacy applications, modern applications. So the task layer then becomes this reach layer, where you use UI automation in RPA to get access to your legacy applications. And then you use API-based automations to gain access to your more modern pieces of software. MCP servers, which are the newest incarnation of how you interact with agents. So together you have AI agents, which are cognitive in nature. Deterministic software, which is RPA and API workflows, forms that task layer. And as you know, at UiPath, we've always had humans, human in the loop capabilities to have humans supervise, approve invoices, or really take corrective actions based off of recommendations from an automation system. Now you have these discrete tasks, deterministic, agentic tasks that are splayed over the entire enterprise, right? It gives you a view for localized, isolated automations, but you don't know how to compress cycle times because there is a human handoff necessary where someone needs to move a task from one system, one process to the other. Process orchestration allows us to glue together all of these tasks that exist in the enterprise into sort of one unison, one global view, where you can inspect and interrogate the overall state of a process, understand where optimization opportunities may be, and drive those efficiencies because you have that global perspective of how things are. So in our world, as we've defined orchestration, you have these deterministic capabilities, also tokenless capabilities, alongside agents and humans, together work in concert to drive a process along from left to right towards the goal.
Gautam, when you hear Raghu describe that, is there a process or is there a part of your business that immediately springs to mind that you can map this against?
It's interesting because we started off with a business problem. Most of our clients are healthcare providers in the market. They run at a very low margin, 2%, 3% margin. So as a business value prop we give our clients, our goal is to give them a 5 to 10% uplift on the revenue while we take out cost structure at the same time. So if we take that framework, so we look at our book of business, say 90% of the RCM, look at the RCM business, and we said, okay, let's first separate it into front, middle, and back. And we set goals for each one of those. So for example, we set a goal, revenue goal, and a cost takeout goal, which has some other subsidiary goals. And we took the team and the product team and said, okay, now identify which sub-processes within, like, say, the back end of the revenue cycle do you think we can take out in a cost-effective manner, because not all AI use cases are cheap.
Yeah.
So that's how we came back with targets for use cases in the front, middle, and the back. And now we've segmented that into what we're going to do in year one, what we might do in year two, and move forward. So that's the approach we've taken in terms of how we create impact, I would say.
Revenue cycle management is one of those things that I think to most people sounds like the thing, like the biggest possible thing there could be. Fundamentally, what does orchestration do to a process like that seems so big, that seems so complex, that seems to have so many different actors?
Yeah, to us at UiPath, I'll first describe a couple of categories of orchestration and then specifically talk about revenue, like the RCM space. Look, I think we think of orchestration in sort of two big buckets. One is, your mostly defined process with very few variations. This is where, think of an employee onboarding process, or think of a loan origination for people with high credit scores. They take a reasonably well-defined path. So you can pre-establish, predefine what the shape of the workflow looks like, what the deterministic tasks are, what the agentic tasks are, where the humans come in, where the exceptions might be, and so on. At UiPath, we've built this thing called Maestro BPMN, which is a BPMN representation of how you build that process out. And it works very well for these examples of cases that I talked to you about. There's a second category of cases where orchestration becomes important, which is every instance of a process takes a different variation because the process is so undefined and complex. Revenue lifecycle management is an example of it. Denials is an example of it.
Yeah.
There is no fixed path. It is chaotic. These processes are chaotic. They're very dynamic. This is where, from a product perspective of UiPath, we take a case-based approach where you define, you understand and embrace the fact that these processes are dynamic, chaotic, right? So you categorize these problems into stages. We have this thing we call a case manager agent. I'm going to a little bit of a technical video, but I think it's important. Is this case manager agent understands the state of the process at any given moment in time and then defines and determines what the next best action is, right? And that next best action can literally be a different action for every instance of the process, right? So taken together, Maestro BPMN for the more well-defined and structured process, and Maestro case for the more chaotic dynamic processes allows UiPath to offer an orchestration platform that meets customers where they are. Revenue lifecycle management it's categorically in the second category, where there isn't a fixed path, where the number of denial codes, you'll know a lot more than I do, right? It's so significantly different that the case agent has to take a very deterministic route specifically for every instance of the process, and the case-based approach to us makes the most sense for that kind of process.
Actually, I add to it, the reason we are in business is so complicated, right? In reality, putting it more seriously, the combination of number of insurance companies, the payers, which are in the thousands in any one client, and the number of treatments patients go in for, number of settings you could go into, hospital, outpatient, physical therapy, ASC, the combination of that Plus, then the employers, each insurance company negotiates a separate deal with employers, and the government has their own Medicare, Medicaid, and things like that. The combination is very too many permutations possible in this thing.
Yeah.
So it's very hard for someone to actually know everything, which is where the use of AI use cases, orchestration, etc., comes in handy, because there's no way you can replicate that knowledge. And so that's where we depend on companies like UiPath to help us through this journey,
You can't really talk about healthcare. You can't really talk about revenue cycle management. You can't really talk about any of these things without talking about things like compliance and data security and access. So I want to sort of talk about governance. So when I say the word governance and people associate with orchestration, what comes to mind for you, Raghu? How do you think about this? What's the role of governance in the modern orchestration story?
Yeah, it's a very tricky question. I wish there was a 2-minute answer to it, but I will try. I think, to be honest, the single most important thing that CIOs who we speak to talk about is, okay, I am doing automation. I am doing AI agents, whether it's on the UiPath platform or elsewhere. How do I make sure that the agent doesn't veer off a trajectory? And how do I ensure that there are guardrails in place and so on? How do I make sure that the agent can only access, a certain subset of information that is authorized to access? How do I make sure that as the agent is goal seeking, that it's not veering off and doing things that I don't want it to do, quite frankly? So as a platform level capability, I think we think about, articulating the power of governance in ways that our business users understand, which is guardrails. Like, okay, here's the things that an agent can do, and strictly, here's the sets of things that an agent cannot do. And it applies to, by the way, it's just not an agent thing. It also applies to things like bots, things like API workflows. It applies to all tasks, right? So we take a very deliberate and pretty fine-grained approach to making sure that the sets of things that tasks and processes can do is inspected with a fine-toothed comb, and give businesses the ability to determine and decide the sets of access controls that exist in what an agent can do. So governance is sort of just one simple lever. The other thing we guide our customers and clients to do is, as you are building agents, we help them build agents that are single-minded. What I mean by that is, you can build a very complicated agent, which just means that it'll probably veer off and do things you don't want it to do. If you make an agent simpler, just like a human worker on a desktop terminal, if you have them do just one thing, they probably do a better job than asking them to multitask and do 5 different things, right? So our platform helps our customers build these single-minded agents. That is extremely helpful, I think. And in terms of just security and governance, we follow all the governance capabilities. We HIPAA compliant, for example, for those customers in the US that care for that certification. SOC compliance is something that comes to mind. We offer strong governance in how we manage our cloud. We have a pretty large group of security experts employed in our payroll, whose full-time job is to make sure that customer assets operating on our cloud is taken care of. And these are some of the leading experts in security and automation. So governance to us is yes, of course, the platform level capabilities, to also trusted personnel with high degree of knowledge in terms of how we operate the cloud and everything in between.
Yeah. So I want to ask you, Gautam, a similar question. When you think about the balance between the potential of the transformation you're trying to affect and the need for, especially in healthcare, for governance and for security, how do you balance those two things? And is there like a I don't want to say a silver bullet, but like, what advice would you give someone maybe who finds themselves at that same place where they're trying to figure out how to balance those two things?
It's interesting because we've got a little extra nuance because we are an outsourcer.
Yeah.
So I've got to also convince my customers that we are safe, and healthcare, as you know, is got a little extra concern in terms of PHI. And an agent goes nuts, it can go do something strange, right? So we got that extra lens. So while we have to govern for ourselves, we all got to share how we're governing with the client. So there are only 2 things just to add to us in our business. One, we have like an AI committee that meets regularly to monitor the performance, who checks in what agent, checks out what agent, etc. So we have that layer that we've got across the company. It's an AI governance committee just to deal with that nuance of that problem. The second thing is, in our business, because the sensitivity of of compliance issues from the government or money left on the table issues. Because let's say you're visiting a doctor and the doctor actually codes saying you saw this treatment, this one came into a regular office visit. Now, if I code it aggressively high, the payer or the government can audit you and sue you for fraud or whatever it is, or flag you for fraud. On the flip side, if I'm very conservative and because unless you leave money on the table.
Yeah.
So we've got that other nuance of governance that is tied to humans. So even though the software may automate it and suggest some stuff, we have to have humans sort of audit it to see how it's performing. So we got that human in the loop requirement, even though the software may think it's automated.
Yeah.
So we have that nuance to play with. And in many cases, we have to share some of the findings with the clients because in today's world, everyone's hyper excited and worried about AI. I'm talking the client base. And therefore, there's trust, but they have trust but to verify it. So we have a little extra level of governance along those lines.
Yeah. I think one of the common misconceptions about orchestration is people assume agent to agent is orchestration. We obviously have a very different view. Can you talk about that, Raghu, talk about that different view and why an agent to agent approach is limiting and why business orchestration approach is the real way you need to go?
Yeah. So it's a good question, and one that we get asked by every client and every EBC that I'm in. We have discussions on this. Look, I think the answer to this is quite honestly evolving as we speak. A year ago, when we first entered this world of orchestration, Daniel, myself, and a bunch of us, we built this product called Maestro. And at that time, I think we had the understanding, and our customers had the understanding even, that you needed to understand that business processes are complex. There are things that are deterministic, there are things that are cognitive, and you don't do cognitive things for things that are deterministic. So if you're retrieving information from a CRM system to determine what the payment amount is, you don't want to use agents for it because you want that step to be as deterministic, as reliable, as dependable, as fast, as cheap as possible, right? And then you want to really use agents for your more cognitive tasks. You're extracting information from documents, processing, evaluating a loan application, and so on. So I think that separation of concern is super, super critical, where you have deterministic pieces of software, cognitive pieces of software, with of course humans supervising it, to make sure that whenever agents are used, or even when deterministic pieces of software are used, the best course of action happens. So as I mentioned to you, this was a year ago. The answer is still true. It's very much the case that the customers that we find have the most success with their business transformation goals use business orchestration and automation in the way I described it. Have the humility to understand that you use deterministic software where it makes sense and use agentic only when you're doing cognitive stuff. If you mix it up, it's very likely that your process goals, your transformation goals will run into duress.
Yeah. Gautam, I want to ask you a similar question. When you're making the decision about where you're going to apply orchestration, where you're going to apply agents versus automation, the way that Raghu described, how do you get there? Like, do you literally sit down and map things out like on a whiteboard or go through like a mind map or something like that is that part of the role of the AI committee? What's that decision-making process like for you guys?
Actually, we go at it slightly differently. Our first thing is we got a bunch of leading thinkers that go back and say, how do I reimagine the whole revenue cycle? Literally.
Yeah.
Because the way it's run today is not necessarily the right way to move forward. Okay. So we got a bunch of people that just do that. So then we go back and we have like 350 odd clients, just put it into context, right? And so everyone runs it slightly differently. But our now view is, if I want to reimagine the whole thing, let me build a back-end product, for example. I'm just going to plop it in place. And then I'm going to do the remaining around it to stitch with humans or with other software around it. So we step back and look at, okay, what is that piece that we're going to build? And when you figure out what's going to build that piece, then we break down the pieces that Raghu was just talking about, right? Which we use tokens, when I'm going with AI, when I'm going with automation, etc. So that's the way we are approaching it. And then as time goes on, this piece that we put in the middle of an operations, RCM operations structure, we sort of widen it, deepen it, sharpen it, etc., etc. So end of the day, our goal is in 3 years or so, if I needed 100 people to do a job, I need about 70 people. So we're driving towards that journey, but we're chipping away at it systematically as long as it's cost effective.
Yeah, that's a great point. Can I add?
Absolutely.
A comment
Sure,
to that?
absolutely.
Yeah. Look. I think I was talking to you about customers who find the most success with using orchestration on the platform are ones that have the humility, or we have the humility to explain to them how you split agentic and deterministic software. But I think you make a very, very good point in terms of, like, even before you do that, this is the second ingredient of what makes orchestration transformation successful is really understand why, really understand how, and really understand first principles, right? Like, use case, you must be sure that the use case that you're chasing after is one that is truly foundational, truly high ROI, and truly first principles solved.
Yeah.
I think that's a very important point.
Absolutely.
Yep.
Absolutely.
Yeah. That's a great way, I think, to sort of to wrap up on. So I wanted to ask you guys both a question. I think there's a question I'll ask you, Raghu, which is about sort of like how we as UiPath think about this. And we think about the next orchestration moment or the next orchestration breakthrough. As you think about like the industries, what's the next moment that you think is coming?
The one that we already see is this idea of building a substrate, which is how we really allow the construction of all the artifacts that go into the mapping of a complex business process and using coding agents to print that process. When I say print, I literally mean literally write the code out end to end and have the business user modify it. Things that would take months before. We imagine a world which is hopefully not too far out, where converting complex processes into reality, into optimized goal-seeking functions will take days, weeks, not months and years.
Yeah.
So that's the transition that we're all in on with UiPath for coding agents, as we've announced recently. This concept of printing the most complex of business processes. There's another thing that is very actively top of our mind and top of the mind of many of our clients is really being their thought partners in helping identifying the highest value use cases for the vertical or the sub-vertical that they're in. And we are actively thinking as a company to build that agentic sparring partner, thought partner for the most senior executives, the most senior entrenched automation specialists in an enterprise, to help them navigate the complexity that exists in the enterprise and help articulate for them the highest value and most optimal use cases. This is very early discovery work that we're doing, and we have a few clients that we're working in sort of ideating it.
Yeah. What about you, Gautam? What's the next moment that you see?
The good news is we only do 70% of our software development ourselves, which is good. Because our view is that I'm going to write 70% myself, and I'm going to find innovative companies around me that I'm going to incorporate into our tech ecosystem to deliver stuff. Now, I don't see a silver bullet in my mind that's going to change my world fundamentally. I see a lot of these point solutions that people produce that I can incorporate much quicker. And so as we're going down this path, we keep looking at the landscape. We're trying to innovate ourselves, find points, but they're all micro innovations now, so they're not anything that will radically change my world. It'll accelerate my world. And so we're going down the path of either I'm going to do it automated with some checks because in our business, revenue or compliance is an issue. Or I'm going to provide a human assist because this is so complicated. I don't need someone 25 years doing the same payer BCBS forever to come and do the work, and get someone literally off the street with like 1-year college degree to sort of come and do this work for us. So basically provide an assist so that the knowledge is brought down to the level that anyone can perform, right? So that's the direction we're headed to. And hopefully one day we can get a patient come to see a doc, and the moment that's done, the doc gets paid. But I think that's quite far away. It's a lot of grind that's going to happen. And so, but I see the incremental improvements along the way, and we just tuck them in as things are going on.
That's great. I really appreciate both of your perspectives
Thank
on that. Thank you so much for being here. Thanks for your for the great answers. Thanks for like walking us through what this orchestration journey looks like, both here at UiPath, but also like out in the real world where you guys are doing business every day.
Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Appreciate it.
Thanks for listening to The Path Forward. We'll see you on the journey ahead.